Okay, so today we're going to do a little bit of oblique drawing. So to show you how to do this, first we're going to take a look at the notes once more. We saw that an oblique is a 3D drawing type. The front of the object is going to be facing us, so it's going to be flat, staring right at us. And our depth lines, showing the depth of the object, are going to be at a 45-degree angle away from us. There's two different types. There's a cabinet oblique and there's a cavalier oblique. The cabinet is at 1/2 of the total depth, so you're actually going to shrink your total depth to 1/2 of what it actually is. The cavalier is at full depth. Okay, so if you have a 2x2x2 cube, your full depth, you would actually draw 2 inches in depth. On the cabinet, you would only draw 1 inch of depth. And I'll show you that in just a moment. So, let's start out with this object here. I've got, it's not quite a cube, it's actually a rectangular prism, and we're going to forget about all the little holes and knobs on it right now. We're just going to pretend those don't exist. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to pretend each one of these squares that's made up by is 2 of our grid spaces. So it would be 2 4 wide, 2 4 tall, and it would be 2 deep. Okay, so we're going to attempt to draw this out in both cabinet and cavalier. Well, in our obliques, it's really easy to start because we know the front of the object is facing us. So we're basically going to draw just a big square like this, a big 4x4 square. And we're going to actually start out with a, let's say, cabinet. Okay, and I'm going to put it right down in the corner. So I need to draw a 1, 2, 3, 4 wide. 1, 2, 3, 4 tall. Just make a big square in these grid spaces. Easy enough. Now, here's the tricky part, adding the depth. Well, how do we do that? Well, luckily, when we're using this grid space, or this grid paper, if you connect from one corner of one grid space to the opposite corner of that grid space, that is a perfect 45-degree angle. And it doesn't matter which direction you go in, it will be a perfect 45-degree angle. And let me get this a little bigger for you. So since we said that each one of these is these blocks is 2x2x2, we are going to now draw in our depth. But if you recall, cabinets only have half depth. So instead of this block being 1, 2 grid spaces, which would be 1, 2 like that, we're actually only going to cut it in half, and we're only going to go 1 grid space. So I'm going to draw from each corner 1 grid space, just like that. And then all that's left is to connect the lines. There's a perfect cabinet shape of this block right here. Okay, let's see what that would look like in cavalier. It starts out the same exact way. We're going to draw that nice 4x4 face because each block is 1, 2 wide, 1, 2 wide, so that's 4 total. 1, 2 tall, 1, 2 tall, so that's 4 total. So we're going to draw a 4x4 square. Just like that. And it doesn't need to be perfect, but I'd try to hit the lines a little bit better than I did. I'm going a little bit quick today. Now, instead of cutting our depth in half, so the 1, 2, instead of cutting it down to just 1, like this one we did, we're actually going to draw out, since it's 1, 2 in depth, we're going to draw out both grid spaces this time. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and then we'll connect. Perfect. Now what you're going to immediately notice is, hey, that's not what this looks like. This cavalier's messed up. Well, that's a property of cavalier drawings. Cabinet is much more realistic. Even though cavalier uses the true dimensions, cabinet drawings look a lot more realistic. So they're preferred when we're using oblique drawings, but you can use either method. What I would like you to do now is make sure you have both of these drawn. If you don't, go back, pause the video, and draw these. And then we're going to move on to some different shapes. Now, as I show you these shapes, I want you to pause the video and simply Rewind it if you need to, but you're going to attempt to draw these shapes on your paper. And if you need to grab another piece of paper, that is just fine. But you're going to attempt to draw these couple shapes on your own on your grid paper. So the first shape is this one right here. Once again, we're going to go with 2 by 2 by 2 blocks. So this would be 2 4 wide, okay, 2 4 6 tall. Okay, so you've got to draw this thing out. Now it's only one block in depth, so that's 1 2 grid spaces in depth. Okay, so I'll spin it around here for a minute. If you want to pause the video, look at it. Let's get that drawn in both cabinet and cavalier. Both cabinet and cavalier. The next shape you're going to draw is a little bit more tough. Okay, this one. All right, so this might take us a little bit of time. We've got to think about where our angles are. Draw out the front face first. Okay, draw out this nice front face first, and then add your depth afterwards. So this shape right here, this simple one, draw that first, and then try to add your depth lines. Once again, it's only one block deep. Remember, these are 2 by 2 by 2 grid space blocks, so don't overcomplicate it. This is 3 blocks wide, so that's 6 grid spaces at the bottom. This part here is 2 blocks high, so that would be 4 grid spaces. Count how many grid spaces you need, draw it out. Once again, I'm going to turn this thing around so that you can see all sides of it. And then I'll hold it in place at the end here. Okay. So pause your video, draw this one out. Okay, on to the last one. Our last final shape here is this one right here, a little bit tricky. It's got a little bit of a stair on it right here. Okay, so once again, we're forgetting about the little holes in here, the little knobs. We just want to pretend those don't exist. 2 by 2 by 2 blocks. We're going to attempt to draw this thing out. Remember, draw that front face first, and then come back and draw the depth lines in. Okay, so I'm going to leave this here for you. Pause your video, draw that in both cabinet and cavalier. Okay, so we've drawn those shapes. Now, if you're done with plenty of time to spare, what you need to do is continue on. You want to get as good as you can at this. What else can you draw in cabinet and cavalier? Can you attempt to draw maybe the computer? Can you draw a house? Can you draw a barn? What can you draw in cabinet and cavalier? Spend the extra time that you have, if you finish early, attempting to draw something that's a little bit more complex that you can think of in your head. If you need to, use Google to look at something like maybe the shape of a house. Go right ahead, or the shape of a barn, go right ahead. But please make sure that you are not distracted and off on other sites during this time. Go ahead and try to draw some additional cabinet and cavalier obliques.